we oughtn't be treating people like this is sort of the seventh grade lunchroom and you're not at the cool kids table.
Yeah, especially since none of us were the cool kids in the seventh grade lunchroom.
You got that right.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer, and this is episode 13. My guest for this episode is Patrick Burns. Before we begin, I want to let you know that I'm honored and delighted that you are listening to my podcast. If you find value from the show and want to help me with hosting costs, I've just launched a Patreon page. Patreon is an online service that allows people to support creators in their work. You can find mine at patreon.com/Mark J. Connor. Now on to the episode. Hi, Patrick.
Hey, Mark. How you doing?
And shall I call you Pat or Patrick?
Oh, whatever you like is fine.
Okay. So why don't you introduce yourself for the listeners who might not know you?
Well, sure. First of all, thanks very much for having me on. It's a real honor for me to be part of what's for you, I know, a new venture, and I appreciate your audience for tuning in. My name is Patrick Burns. I am a resident and lifelong resident of Bloomfield, New Jersey, where I went through the public school music program. I did not come from a musical family, but I, like probably millions of other students, went to an instrumental music demo in elementary school. I think for me it was in fifth grade. My elementary school was K to 6. And so I guess maybe it was fourth grade. At the end of fourth grade, I went to an assembly, and it was sort of the parade of instruments, you know, all the woodwinds, all of the brass, all the strings, the percussion. And we were told, you could try these things. And if you're serious about it, if you would like to, you can, bring an instrument home. And try it, and then maybe sign up for the fall. And for whatever reason, I was very interested in the clarinet, and I walked home with a clarinet one day, and my mom's like, "Oh, what's that?" And I said, "It's a clarinet. I just like the sound of it." And that was in 1978, and sort of the rest is history. I graduated with 2 composition degrees. I was a music education major for 3.5 years and changed 1 week before my student teaching experience to a composition major, which I recommend to no one that they do. So if you are out there as a music education student thinking, "Oh, I should change," no, don't do it. Don't do it. It worked for me, but it's high risk, and that's a whole other story. I was a performer mainly for a number of years in my 20s. Had a lot of experience playing in orchestras, chamber music, playing the Metropolitan Opera for the summer ballet orchestras, some Broadway things, but I wound up losing my playing career by the time I was 29. I developed a hand problem that took me 5 years to, go to multiple doctors, tests. Nobody ever could find anything wrong with it. I eventually abandoned performing, went much more seriously into teaching and writing. I had been conducting all of that time, started my own band called the Bloomfield Youth Band when I was 17, still direct that. My passion really was performance. But since I couldn't do that, I thought, I can't give up on music because it's so much a part of my life. So then I sort of redirected things much more seriously toward composition and teaching and writing. I've been on the adjunct faculty at Montclair State University as professor of theory and composition for 23 years, 6 years at New Jersey City University, where I direct the Symphony of Winds and Percussion, which is a fabulous group. And I write music mostly for bands, but I do some things for orchestral arrangements for video games now, which is a lot of fun. And in my previous life, my earlier life as a composer, it was mostly chamber music. And I did 15 years of public school teaching too. So it's been a very, very interesting and diverse ride. And Bandworks Publications is in the last seven years, and I'm president of the local It's called the Bloomfield Federation of Music, 5 performing ensembles that are community-based nonprofit organization.
You and I have a very similar story. You're about 2 years older than me, I think. And I had the same thing. I got 3.5 years into my music ed degree. I dropped, it changed to general music because I didn't have a comp degree for composition, went and got my master's in composition, and then ended up going back and teaching high school.
Yeah, that is similar. And I think you probably understand why I always make the caveat and I say, don't try this at home, because it is very high risk. I mean, it does work for some people, but never advised a single student to do it the way I did it, just because statistically it's much harder.
Yeah, I mean, I made some mistakes along the way. I wish that I had gotten my education degree all the way through and then just gotten a master's in composition. That was a mistake. The second thing is, I'm a doctorate in composition who writes band music, which makes me a man without a country.
Yeah, pretty much.
I don't know if I would ever advise someone to get a doctorate in composition. I think conducting or even a PhD in theory if you want to go teach theory.
It's one of those things where this conversation comes up a lot with particularly undergrad composition majors or performance majors, and they'll say, okay, so what do you want to do after you get your bachelor's? Well, I want to go to grad school. Okay. So you want to get your master's. Okay. Now, and after you get your master's, what do you want to do? Well, I guess I want to get my doctorate. Some say I want to get my doctorate and I want to teach, or some say I want to do this, but it's very like you get to a point where people say, well, I really don't know. And, this is where education comes in. Of course, we don't want, you don't want people, I hate the term, falling back on teaching, because that's not what teaching is.
No.
You cannot fall back on teaching anyone anything. You don't want your doctor to have fallen back on med school. You want people that are passionate about teaching, being in music in some way or any field. But it's a problem. It is a tough career path. It's just the nature of what we do.
Right. Yeah. So I want to talk about your early experience as a clarinetist. You mentioned that you picked up the clarinet at the band fair. You liked the way it sounded. But what was high school or junior high like? What were those experiences like that sort of gave you that passion to want to be in music as a profession?
Well, it's a good question. I think back to this with some frequency when I talk to people about it. And I remember back when I first started in 5th and 6th grade, and you're playing a new instrument, you're learning how that works and getting better at it every day and experiencing the frustrations and the joys. But when I went to middle school, so again, 5th and 6th was the end of my elementary school. And then at the time, the middle school was grades 7, 8, 9. So when I walked into 7th grade, I believe it was just one band. It was not broken up. It was just a 7, 8, 9 band. So now I'm coming into a new school with kids that are much older, and now we're playing this music that to me sounds, incredibly awesome. All sorts of different colors and ideas and instrumentation. You go from a small elementary school band to a big middle school band. Well, that's like a change of universe. And I remember that in 7th grade was really the first time when I started noticing not only the way things sounded, which was intriguing and mysterious and awesome, but I started paying attention to these names in the upper right-hand corner of the sheet music, the composers. I never really had thought about that before. And so I'm seeing, things like Jared Spears and, Claire Grundman and whomever. And I started thinking like, oh my God, these are amazing sounds. These guys must, live on top of Mount Olympus or something. These are amazing things. I remember really being influenced by that, really being awakened by that, I think is the right word. And at the same time, when I was in 7th grade, not right away, but at some point, the middle school band director did something I wouldn't say for me, but to me. And she said, we really need an alto clarinet player. Would you like to play alto clarinet? And I thought that this was the greatest honor that anybody could do. And I said, oh, sure, if you need it. And I started playing this instrument that didn't want to do anything that my B-flat clarinet wanted to do. And I was like, I sound terrible. And she's like, no, don't just stay with it. We really need it. I was never good at playing the alto clarinet, but it also, what that did was it made me listen to the band in a different way, because now I was not playing a clarinet part in a more, I was playing an alto clarinet part, hearing different things in a different way, sitting even in a slightly different area. And so I paid more attention then to not so much to melody, but to color and timbre, which I didn't think of at the time, but I know I was paying attention to those things. So this was sort of a simultaneous awakening to the fact that human beings actually wrote this music that was so amazing. And, what really does go into a piece of music? How are these instruments working together? So I would say 7th grade was really a pivotal time for me.
So did you write music in high school? Were you tinkering around with writing at all at that point?
In high school, I tinkered around a little bit, and I would say the word tinker is perfect. I mean, I really didn't know what I was doing. I hadn't had any theory in high school. I started studying privately clarinet when I was in 6th grade, at the beginning of my 6th grade year when I was still in elementary school. And I continued with that same teacher all the way through my high school graduation. So I knew, I'm sure I knew all of my major scales and some minor scales and some very, 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 very basics. By then, by my summer of my junior year, so this would have been spring, summer 1986, I started the Bloomfield Youth Band. So I was starting in on conducting already. So I learned a lot, basically, if you will, on the job. It was not until college, like literally the first day of university, when I started really writing music seriously. When I said, okay, let's just do this. And I was not, at that point, I was not a composition major. I was a music ed major. But I remember I was like, okay, I want to do this. I'm curious about it. I want to do it. But in high school, just a little bit here or there, but I really didn't know much about what I was doing.
Okay, so let's talk about the Bloomfield Youth Band. That's one of the more interesting things to me in your bio, is that as a young person, you started a band and conducted it, and it's still going.
Still going. We just had the finale of our 31st concert season just this past Saturday, a couple days ago. We bring in a big name every year, almost every year, and we've had Sam Hazel a few times, and Bob Sheldon was just here this weekend. We brought over Philip Spark twice from London. I never would have started the youth band at any age. It was not my idea, and I was resistant to it. It was really the idea of my private teacher, my private lesson teacher, John Spano. So I never would have started the youth band had it not been for John Spano, my private clarinet teacher. It was one particular day. My high school at that time was 10, 11, and 12. Bloomfield High School was sophomore, junior, senior. And I did marching band my sophomore year, had a great time, losing my shoe in the mud and things like that. It was, how it goes. It's great fun with your friends and all that. In my junior year, I wanted to join the local civic band, which I did do. And I just didn't want to devote that much time to marching, a couple of practices a week and then the weekend stuff. And I didn't play a fall sport, so I couldn't be exempted from marching band and still play in concert band. It was a requirement. Like, if you're not playing a fall sport and you are registered for band, you must march. And so I'm like, I just don't want to do this. It was nothing against the program. I just didn't want to be marching 4 times a week in the fall. And so at a certain point, I'd expressed an interest in conducting and was, studying scores. And my music teacher said, well, now that you have all this extra time, why don't you start your own band? And he said this to me in the September of my junior year. And I was like, what are you talking about? He said, yeah, you have an interest in conducting, and a lot of, you obviously are very passionate about band music. You just joined the civic band. You have a lot of friends. Why don't you start your own band? And I was like, you're crazy. And so, a week or two went by, and then he mentioned it again. And these were hour lessons I had weekly. And I'm like, oh, Mr. Spano, come on. Well, he mentioned this pretty much every week in some way, like, hey, how's the band coming along? Or, I talked to another student, in the high school band. Like, I talked to so-and-so, and he said, that he would play in the band if you start one. There was always some reference to it. And I'm like, come on, you just stop bothering me with this. Well, by May, near the end of the school year, I was like, I'm just so sick of hearing this guy talk about this band. And I said, all right, you know what? It was like Memorial Day weekend. I said, I'm going to make some calls. There was no, as you know, email at the time. I said, I'll make some phone calls and I'll see who's interested, and then we'll just see what happens. And I figured I'm going to call people, and I really promised that I would make the effort to do it. But I said, I'm going to call people, and I'll probably have 5 or maybe 10. So I come into my lesson on the following week, Tuesday or whatever. I had my lesson, and I had to walk down his few stairs into his side entrance into his basement. And he's at the bottom of the stairs, and he's got his hands in his back pocket. I opened the door. First thing he says is, so how did it go? And I said, oh, I got 32 names. And he's like, well, I guess you better start your own band then. And the rest is history.
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, sometimes just starting something is the hardest thing.
Yep.
So what was the first piece that you did? Do you remember?
Wow, that's a good question. Let's see. On that program, we had a piece, an obscure one. I can't even remember who wrote it. It's called Portrait of the Land.
Uh-huh. I knew you would remember this.
Yeah, and then there's Chorale and Shaker Dances on there by John Zdeklik. Great standard that's not played anymore. I think that there was maybe a Movement of the Holst on there. I have the program somewhere, but we had what is that march? It's a Sousa march. It goes into G flat in the trio section. Not on the Mall, of course. On Parade, maybe that. So it's there. It's there in the back of my mind.
Someone is listening right now, yelling the answer at us.
I'm sure. So I'm sorry. I know it's not on the Mall. I know that's golden. Please don't send comments. I know it's. I can tell you the trio section is in G flat major, and it might be on Parade. I don't know.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that, because that is something good to remember.
I don't know why I asked it. I just figured it's one of those things that you never forget.
Yeah, and it's there, wheeling around somewhere. I'm sure I could pull other ones out too. Okay,
so you mentioned that when you were in college, you started to write and you started to compose, and then you also earlier in the interview mentioned that you moved away from chamber music. When did that sort of move to band music happen?
It's funny. When I finally gave up the ghost on my playing career was at the end of this 5-year odyssey of doctors and testing, gradually, very slowly losing function in my right hand. And no one could ever tell me what was wrong with my hand. I went to neurologists, I went to surgeons, I went to physical therapists, I went to on and on. Everybody told me what I didn't have, that I didn't have carpal tunnel, that I didn't have focal dystonia, that I didn't have MS. One neurosurgeon was very, very happy to tell me after an electromyogram and all this testing that, Mr. Burns, great news. You don't have Lou Gehrig's disease. You don't have ALS. And I was like, what are you talking about? She's like, oh, yeah, that was totally a possibility based on your symptom. What? All right, now, but what can I do about my playing? And she said, well, I don't really know about that, but you don't have ALS. So I saw that my life was really becoming very difficult. I'll be very honest with you and your audience. I was depressed to some degree. I was drinking too much, and I was becoming more and more miserable every day. And finally, I just said, I have to stop. I have to just let this go, and I have to put this away, and I have to become what I need to become here. Literally, I mean, within days of and I didn't publicize this, but within days of just saying, all right, I'm really going to put this away and be okay with it. I'm not going to struggle against this anymore. I've done everything that I can do within reason. Maybe within a week or two, I saw an opening in local paper for a music position that was absolutely perfect for me. And I wound up teaching in that district for 15 years. And at the same time, then director of bands at Montclair State University, Dr. Mary Ann Craig, who just became a great friend, and she still is. She's a wonderful musician and person. She happened to come to me and said, why don't you write a piece for us for next year? Now, I didn't go up to her and say, look, I'm going to focus more on composition. I'm putting this away. For whatever reason, it was the time. And that was 1998. So starting then, even though I knew bands more than anything else, I just wasn't writing band music. I was writing mostly chamber music. And that was sort of the beginning of my new real serious career writing for Winds.
Yeah, it's interesting how things seem to come together and coalesce for us in our lives. The longer I live, the more that I see that happening, or at least upon reflecting back.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that you can't see that at the time. I mean, certainly I couldn't. I was only focused on what I was losing, and I was losing a lot. I mean, I was working very hard to try to, against everything that I was being shown, and I was, being like anybody. I was struggling against this, I finally, what finally pushed me over the edge finally was the neurosurgeon who told me the great news that I didn't have ALS, which is great news. But I said, well, what do I do? How do I, fix this? And she said, well, and this is the surgeon. She said, well, I don't really know. She said, it seems that the problem is most likely in your forearm based on this test. So what we could do is, quote, we could open it up, poke around in there, and see if we can find something to fix. And at that point, I was like, I'm done. Like, you're not poking around anywhere. I mean, if you can tell me, like, this is the problem, if we do this is, I just thought, this is just insanity. So I was focused on trying to solve this problem that I could not solve. And then once I just said, okay, legit, I'm just going to let it go. Then all these other things that were probably waiting to happen, just, okay, here they are.
And so you started you said in 1999, you had your health issues and you started to write band music, and you had the opportunity at Montclair. How did that sort of develop to Bandworks?
I had my first piece published, and most of my catalog wound up being published with Larry Dan and Dan Publications. Larry is just a great gentleman, and I learned so much from him. He's the one who gave me my first opportunity, and I'll always thank him for that when no one else would. And I sent the bulk of my catalog to him over the years before I started Bandworks. I just thinking about it very quickly, there might be five or six pieces of mine total that are not Bandworks, that are not published with Larry. So Larry has like 20 something of the stuff that I've written pre-Bandworks. And I knew that at some point, he was going to get out of the business. Walter, I have a couple of pieces with Walter and Grand Mesa, and Walter's a terrific gentleman, and, he's always done right by me. But, publishers can't take every piece that's written. I mean, they can't, by anybody, they can't. There's no way. So I thought, well, I need to maybe start making a transition into what I will do after Larry is, sells the business or whatever he's going to do. And so this is several years before. Before I started thinking that way, though, many people said, you should start your own company. You should start your own company. It was kind of like the youth band thing, like you should start your own band. And I thought, well, all the initial reactions were typical. Like, I don't want to be bothered with marketing and with all this nonsense that publishers have to go through. And I just want to, I'm already busy enough. But then I thought, well, maybe this is what should happen. The business has changed radically. The internet and electronic delivery of music and immediate delivery of music makes things much easier. The uploading of recordings, the publicity is instantaneous. You don't have to only rely on print ads and, CDs. You just don't have to do that. So maybe this isn't it's difficult, but maybe it's not so high a mountain. Maybe it's actually doable. So I then thought, well, maybe I'll do this. And then I thought, well, am I only going to publish my music, which is why I mainly started it. And I thought, well, I can hit more targets if I'm publishing some other people's music too.
Yeah.
It's just never meant to be, nor will it ever become anything like Alfred or Hal Leonard or anything big where, you're dealing with lots of composers and lots of pieces. This is Bandworks Publication. You're talking to him right now. Meaning the guy that's it all filters through me. I don't have a staff. I have one guy who helps me with editing a lot, and I do have a web guy. But basically, all the decisions, I don't have a team, and that's okay. But I thought, well, this is an opportunity for me to put a spin on some of the things about the business which are relics of another time. For instance, the immediate delivery of music, which now people have gotten into. I don't own anybody's copyright except my own. I don't want to own anybody's copyright. We've all signed our copyrights away to publishers, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Please don't listen to this and say he's trashing the business. I'll let you know when I'm trashing the business. No, it makes sense. But I don't want to own another composer's music. I think a composer ought to own his or her own music. Okay? I can still make money on it. You can still make money on it. I don't pay. The standard is, as you know, with the exception of people who have, their own private deals, is 10% royalty. We pay 22.5%. Because I have a much lower overhead. I don't print up 100 or 200 stacks per title. It's print on demand, so I can keep expenses low. If you order PDFs, I can keep expenses really low and pass on more of this to the composers. Yes, we do deal with dealers, and of course, dealers. When the dealer is involved, a dealer has to make a percentage, and that's great. In that case, if I have to pay a royalty out to the dealer or sales commission, that's fine. Then my composers are still going to make 17.5%, which is still very good. We also donate. I also thought, well, there's got to be a way to do something else with this too. So we donate about 10% of our gross sales to one charity or another. We've donated multiple times to Feeding America, and we just completed a period of time from February through the end of May where we're donating to the Suicide Prevention Foundation. So we'd like to try to do some good things with it too. And these are not vast amounts of money, I assure you, but I think we can make a positive impact and maybe turn people on to some other things beyond the music itself.
Yeah, there's so much about this. I think the decision to bring on other composers is really a wise one. If it's just your music, then it's not Bandworks. It's
right.
Burns Works, if you will.
Exactly right. I forget who said it to me. He said it to me at Midwest. He said, "You know what?" He said, "You ought to. You can call it Bandworks, but just spell it Banned. Bandworks, and people find your music left and right." I said, "Boy, that's a great idea."
As a publisher, then, or as the editor for Bandworks, what are you looking for in pieces that you're publishing?
I first like to work with people that I know. Not because I don't want to meet and hear new works, but because I have a limited amount of time, and opening everything up to everything is very difficult for one person to do. And I want people to understand that, that when I say, thank you for submitting your work, but I can't take anything on at this time, anything else, it really means that I can't, I'm just not able to do it. There are a lot of pieces that I would like to publish that I just feel that I can't reach that far right now. I might be able to say, well, I could do that in 5 years, but that's not fair to you as a composer. I like to, so I can work with people that I know, and I have, worked with, and I do work with newer people along the way. I was first introduced to Anthony O'Toole's music through Sam Haza. And Sam and I have been very, very close friends for a number of years. And a few years ago, he said, I heard this piece by this guy when I was out at IUP, Anthony O'Toole, you should take a look and a listen. And, the rest is history. We published a number of things of Anthony's, and he's just a wonderful writer and great to get along with. I don't have the capacity to publish 15 or 20 new works by, 15 or 20 new people. So I start with what I have, and then I maybe add a new one here, new one there, meeting a new person. And it has grown a little bit, and I think it will continue to. I'm just basically what I want to do is I want to manage this very small area in a small way and do it as well as I can, rather than saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to take on this and this and this, and then realize I have really dug myself a hole that's not good for me or the music or the composer.
I think people appreciate quality, and quality attracts quality. And
we make mistakes. I mean, it's like me. I make mistakes. It's tough. I mean, you cannot be perfect with it. But we try to. I'm always thinking about, since most of what I do is conduct and direct. I'm thinking about what experience does the consumer want to have? What experience does somebody like me, who is, I want to program this piece, I want to get this, I want to buy this, and maybe that, and listen to this. What kind of experience is the consumer having? And how can I make it as good for them as possible with the quality of the music and with the delivery and, the ultimate experience? And most of the time, the great majority of the time, it works out great. And sometimes, we realize that we need to do some things better, and we try to do that.
So what do you think the consumer is looking for then? Well,
tough. And I ask myself that question all the time. And it's a funny thing. Now we're in June 2017. I started Bandworks officially in March of 2010. My thinking was and is that by now, that more people, and I don't mean only for Bandworks necessarily, but I am talking with anecdotally here, that more people would want PDFs and immediate delivery than actually do. Because about half of the orders, maybe slightly more than half, are still print music, which is fine. There's no problem. We're not like, no, we're only doing PDFs. No, we will send you printed parts. And by the way, when you buy a piece from Bandworks, we only send you one copy of each part because we want you to make 35 copies for your 35 flutes that you really don't want in your band. I mean, right. Just that's what consumers want. I mean, when I buy a piece, I don't like, I'm going to have to order 4 more of these parts at $350. No. When you buy a piece of music, when you buy it legit from me, make the copies of the parts. If you need extra copies of scores, please come to us because composers do make money on that. And if, you're ordering 6 scores or 5 scores for a festival, that does make a difference. But otherwise, make the copies. I would have thought that more people, the percentage would have been higher with people opting for PDF. But as yet, it's about 50-50, maybe slightly more toward print. I think that will continue to change over time. I think that people will gravitate more toward the PDFs and the instantaneous delivery. Like if you see a piece of music or hear a piece of music on Bandworks and you say, wow, that is really, really cool. I've looked at the score sample. Yep, we can do that. Hey, I have my band coming in 40 minutes for their hour period. If there were only a way that I could have this right now, well, you can have it right now, and you can have it out on the stands. That's an attractive thing.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Do you know Kurt Connect and Music Spoke?
No, I don't.
Kurt is an organist and mostly choral composer, and his wife is in business and has business degrees, marketing degrees, and they founded a company called Music Spoke for the choral world mostly. They have a few chamber pieces, but they're mostly focused on choral. So they go to ACDA, they go to the big music ed conferences, but they're doing a model that's completely online. And they only sell directly from them. So they deliver. So in the choir world, one of the big problems is that you can buy $1.25 part and then copy it for the whole choir.
Absolutely.
So they track all the sales. And what Kurt loves to say is that he knows if he sees a performance of one of his Music Spoke pieces and that person's only bought one copy, he knows something's fishy.
Precisely. And that's exactly right.
And he offers a pretty high percentage for the composer relative to the traditional publishing model.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got a really interesting thing going with Music Spoke.
No, that sounds good. I mean, and it's an attempt to address multiple issues like, okay, how can I get the music to you quickly, but also how can we protect our own interests? And as you say, quite rightly, the choral world is particularly vulnerable to this. Like, if you make 25 copies of your trombone 2-part, who cares? Honestly,
right?
Who cares? But with a choral work, and our system, look, I could tighten it up even more. I don't want it to be super restrictive, though. If I were a choral publisher, it would be a much different thing. We want everybody to get a percentage based on what their effort has been and the business model. We also want to be able to get music to directors and also to have them feel like when you've bought it, you've bought it.
Right.
Honestly, publishers, it's easier now, much, much, much easier now with PDF. But publishers, they don't have the time or desire, honestly, to deal with the person doing it the right way and saying, okay, I need a second trombone part, I need a first alto part, I need a euphonium TC part, and I need a percussion 4 part. And I'm contacting you to buy these parts because I need them for festival in 2 weeks. And, that's great. That's somebody doing it the right way. But it's a lot of effort for the director. It makes the kids wait. It's a lot of effort for the director. It's also more money, even a little bit. It's more money, and it's more effort on the other side. It's just got to be, it has to be made easier on our delivery end, and it is. And instrumentally, so people often say, well, aren't you concerned that somebody will just take those PDFs and give them to their friends? Well, look, if I wanted to steal a piece, if you wanted to steal a piece and distribute it, you could easily do it. Everybody can easily do it.
Sure.
Whether or not they're in PDFs, even with hard copies, you run them through, scan them through, done. You can break the law if you really want to. I don't think naively, I do believe that most people in this industry, most of the consumers, they understand. I mean, they're doing it the right way. They're doing it the right way, and I appreciate that. I don't know what I would do. I can't imagine what I would do other than what your friend is doing, what Kurt is doing, if I were a choral publisher, because I have thought about that many times. Like, geez, this has got to be. I mean, you got a target on your back a mile wide here.
Yeah.
You get around it, but sounds good.
But yeah, I agree with you 100%. When you spend that kind of money, especially in a band director, I had such a small budget. Music ate up a lot of that.
That's right, and too. And that's something I think about a lot as well. It is a budget item, but $100. When you think about $100, well, $100 if you're buying 6 pieces for your concert is $600 plus shipping and all this, and that for a relative to a band director's budget, it's a lot of money. On the other hand, when you're talking about $100 for a piece of music, and many pieces are more, and many pieces are less. $100 for a piece of music that you're going to be dealing with for 3 or 4 months, it's really nothing.
Right. And you know what? That $600, if that's the big part of your budget, that's what you're there for, is to teach that music. So yes, you have to pay for instrument repair, you have to do other things, but that budget is for that.
Exactly right. Exactly. Yeah, it's true. So in one sense, it may be a lot of money relative to your bottom line that, I can only spend this much maximum. On the other hand, when you think about the value of and the time that you're spending with this thing that you bought for $100, that you can also, again, don't forget, use in the future, it's really not a lot of money when you measure it that way. And you can say, that's easy for you to say, Burns, I only have $800 for the year in music purchase. Well, I know, I've been there too, but when you can measure things in several ways.
Yeah, no, it's a balance. You also have to have enough music for your programs too.
That's right. That's exactly right.
All right, Patrick. So I want to ask you, what is your process for writing a new work? And maybe if you can also talk about advice you might have for young composers.
Right. This is something that I think is, in some ways, composers tend to be very similar with each other on some things, and they are also widely divergent in the way they work. I do comparatively very little writing. When I'm writing a piece, I'm thinking about that piece all the time. And whether or not I'm at the computer, at the keyboard, I'm thinking about it all the time. When I'm not writing a piece, I'm doing other stuff. I mean, I'm programming concerts, I'm conducting, and I might go many, many weeks without writing a piece. I take a view that's a little bit different, I think, than many other composers. I do not think now I'm speaking for myself, it is not advantageous for me to write every day. It doesn't work for me. It's not advantageous for me to write at the same time every day. I know composers who do write every day. I know composers who write at the same time every day. Fantastic. If it works for them, then that's fine. For me, I think think more and write less. I only write a few pieces a year. I could write a lot more. I could take a lot more commissions. I don't. And the reason why I don't do those things is because if I'm writing too much, if I'm producing 15 or 20 pieces a year, then I'm not going to be able to say very much. I'm going to have a lot of notes, and I'm going to take a lot of money from a lot of people. But there's not going to be a lot of uniqueness in every single one of those pieces, because I don't believe that you can produce that much, that often, for that many years and still have something to say. Now, I know that some people, their blood pressure just went up probably by 20 points. And I don't mean it to. I don't mean for that to happen. But I do think that for my own way of working, it really involves a lot more thinking, which is not to say that it's thinking only and barely any writing, because you can overdo it. When I'm writing, I'm really invested in making something happen. I think, in short, the advice then to younger composers is to really focus on, once you're developing your voice, to really focus on the quality and the craft of what you're doing rather than the speed. Yes, you have to meet deadlines. Yes, you have to get good at saying, well, I've got to have a score and parts that are clean to an ensemble by this date. And you have to be able to meet that date if you're going to work as a composer. Now, commercial work is a little bit different. If I'm doing something for a video game orchestration or something like that, it's a little bit different, because that is more like, okay, I have this, I have 3 days to do this, and I have this, and I have a week to do this. It's a little bit different than the process with commissioning and band music and getting your stuff out there. The timetable is a different thing. I think if we make the band, let's see, how do I put this? I think if we make our contribution to composing band music so speed oriented, we sacrifice a huge amount of the artistry and quality that we otherwise could have. It's a balance. You have to balance these things. Learning how to balance is, no one can teach you that. You have to learn that yourself. You've got to meet the deadline, but you shouldn't have so many damn deadlines that only 10% of what you're writing is going to be worth it. In his entire life, Ravel wrote 85 pieces. Now, some of them were very long, and they were all intricate in one way or another. But interestingly enough, Ravel believed that he would never be considered a great composer. And when asked why, he didn't say because the music that I'm writing isn't good enough, or because of the style or the orchestration. He said that all of the great composers were prolific, that Bach wrote well over 1,000 pieces, and Mozart wrote well over 600, and on and on. That all the great composers were prolific. He said, and then the famous part of his quote was, "I tore the music out of me in little pieces." But I think precisely for that reason, because he was so meticulous, because he was so focused on detail and quality, that everything that man wrote, every note was a gem, was elegant, was beautifully crafted, was meticulously crafted. For that reason, he was also operating in a different musical language than Mozart and Haydn. And not to trivialize their work, those were some of the greatest works ever written, but it's a much narrower language. The more complex the language that you're dealing with, the harder it is to be what we might consider prolific. William Walton only averaged about one piece a year in great quality. That includes TV music as well. So we have to, in the band world particularly, we have to step back. We have to not maybe take every commission that's offered. I know, Burns, I got to make money. I know, I want you to make money. I want you to get your works out there. But if we're taking so much work that we really can't, that we're fighting deadlines all over the place, then I'm not really sure what kind of art we can make on every single piece. Of course, you're going to write some really good stuff, but I think it's a problem. I think it's largely commission driven. And commissions are nice. I love them. If you want to contact me, I'd be glad to write for you. But we have to police ourselves maybe a little bit better. That may be heresy. And, I've been called a heretic before, and that's fine. I don't want to leave people with the impression that I think that being lazy and not writing is good. If you're inspired to write, you're going to write. I just think we have to think more about each note that we're writing.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Some of this, I think you touched upon it, is a little bit of the symptom of the 20th century. The Ravel-Webern model of the tortured composer, where everything is difficult to do, really permeates the classical concert world to this day.
That's very true.
And we see this in new music. When I was in graduate school, 2 pieces a year was a prolific year for me.
Well, yeah. Also, too, when you were in graduate school, you were probably still doing things by hand.
Yeah,
and
some, yeah.
And
but even the computer music, the music I was writing at the time, the computer actually got in the way of that.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting though, because part of me says, well, that was great because I was really working on really tight, crafty things, getting better at that. But the other part of me says, but had I written more, I'd have learned more too. And so I think the balance that you mentioned is really important.
It's the discipline of composition is very, very, very different. It's similar in some ways, but it's very different to the discipline of being a performer. So when I was playing in New York, when I was auditioning, planning to audition for the Cincinnati Symphony and things of this nature, I was practicing 4 hours a day or so. I was playing jobs at night and on the weekends. I was playing all the time. And if I didn't practice, and I would set aside maybe one day where I would just I'm not going to practice. I might play, but I'm not going to work. But man, I was on that instrument all the time because you have to be if you're going to function at that highest level as a performer. Now, composition is a bit different. We can be doing things to make ourselves really, really much better composers without actually writing music. For instance, score study. Find a piece of music that you really like of any era, get a score, go to imslp.org, get a free recording on YouTube, and for free, you can have the greatest 2-hour lesson of your life. So like that contribution to your knowledge as a writer and to your craft as a writer can come through other areas or other disciplines of study related to writing, but not necessarily writing it itself.
Right. What are you looking for when you look at a score?
Wow. I think it's probably, I try to get at and I know this is going to be another maybe heretical thing. How sincere is the composer being with getting his or her ideas out? And then in what colorful ways does it happen? It's a hard thing to quantify, because I'm not saying that this composer was faking it, but some ideas are just better than others. And how, or maybe this is it. How well does the composer get across his or her ideas in this medium? Maybe the ideas are okay. Maybe they're good. Maybe they're not great ideas, but maybe the craft and the orchestration makes that good idea really great. For instance, Respighi was a phenomenal orchestrator. Terribly, I think, even though he's still revered today, I think he's underrated as an orchestrator. And he took a very small, an economy of means, but made those ideas just absolutely phenomenal with an incredible craft and of orchestration. So I'm looking for that, like what's the synthesis between the idea and the conveyance of that idea through the medium?
Okay, I know you mentioned that this is a hard question for you, and I think it's difficult for everyone because we could all have a pretty large list. But do you have a favorite work for wind ensemble or band?
I always say that when people ask this, I say anything with my name on it. Which is,
good answer.
Of course, the glib answer. Impossible to say for me, honestly. Trying to think of pieces that really have affected me in one way or another at different times in my life. I did mention Persichetti's music, and that still stands. One piece that I think is extraordinarily effective and moving, and again, an economy of means, but uses time so wisely, is the Ronald Lopresti Elegy for a Young American, which I think is just one of the great works for band. It comments on this tragedy of the Kennedy assassination, and he started it right after that happened. And also Warren Benson started his memorial, which was the Passing Bell, at the same time. But the Elegy for a Young American is it's this portrait of musical grief, and I think that is just a gem. Another piece that I think is incredibly influential, and maybe that's really kind of a sterile word. It's just that really a monument is James Seiler's The Hound of Heaven, which is it's about a 20-minute piece, 6 movements, and it's after the poem by G.K. Chesterton. It's a monument. And I've told them this several times. I think it's one of the great pieces, truly one of the great pieces written in the last 40 years for wind band. I'm trying to think of pieces that are sort of not ones that necessarily everyone would mention. Of course, we know full suites are, a piece that's sort of neglected. It's funny when we talk about things that are neglected, maybe a little off the radar these days is Gordon Jacobs' Original Suite, which is a wonderful piece of music. There's so much value in that. Oh my God, it's hard to think about everything. A piece of music that was particularly influential to me, I don't know that I would call it a great piece of music, although it's a very, very, very fine piece of music. It's a wonderful piece of music. Is David Holsinger's Liturgical Dances, and I played that. Now this is in me in my senior year high school All-State. That was the finale of the concert, and that moment was when I realized this is what you're meant to do. And that piece really is special to me for those reasons. And then the craft in that piece is particularly wonderful. The manipulation of time and music I guess I'm sure I could go on, and I'm sure that there are like 500 pieces that I didn't mention.
Oh yeah, you'll think about them after
Yep.
for days now. It's that musical peak experience that we all have from time to time that makes us want to keep going. The analogy I give is if you play golf, I hack my way around the course for 90 strokes, but then there's 3 or 4 shots that are just perfect, and then I keep chasing after those.
Yes, exactly right. Where you could not have done anything. You could have put this on Sunday afternoon at the Open Championship, and no one would have hit a better shot than you just did, and that's what makes it go.
And I completely forget about all the other moments. And it's the same thing with music. You forget about all the hours spent in the practice room or all the hours frustrated over a piece of music that you're trying to write when the magic happens, or you have that moment where it just brings you to tears or brings you to joy or whatever it is that emotionally touches you.
That's right. And, and you're absolutely right. And teaching, of course, as you know, is the same way, where you might have had, these email problems that you're just like, I cannot believe this nonsense. But then, all of that is forgotten when you have this incredibly memorable performance where it's made everybody happy. And
mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean those moments, and it sounds like the Holzinger was one of those for you.
It really was. It was sort of the thing where I had been moving in this direction, and then this was like, okay, that's it. The light is not sort of on; it's dim. It's like that's it. I really felt that I was meant in that moment. This is what is meant for you.
Okay, is there anything coming up that you'd like to share or promote?
Let's see, a couple of things. On July 2nd, the incredible Westchester Symphonic Winds will be performing my work for narrator and band called I Loved Well Those Cities. They're going to be, we just performed it together in Tarrytown with me conducting. They're going to be performing it with their wonderful conductor, Kurt Abersol, at the Caramore Festival in New York, which is a great thing. And I'm honored that they're going to be including that in their program. I'm also writing a new piece for them for next May. It's their 30th anniversary. I don't know what that piece is going to be yet. Sorry, Kurt. I'll figure it out soon. I'm also writing a new piece, which I have started. It's called Oasis. And it is for the equally fabulous Ridgewood Concert Band, directed by Chris William, my good friend of many years. They're going into their 30-something season, but they're changing their name to the New Jersey Wind Symphony. So this will be on their inaugural program in October, and I'm really excited about that. Have upcoming performances of my vignettes for solo euphonium and band, which is sort of making the rounds now, and that was premiered a couple of months ago, and bands are doing that now, and I'll be doing that in the fall with my university group. So there's a lot going on, and what I really like about writing, what I like most about writing, is that I don't know what's going to happen next. If I show you a score, if I show you, or if I play for you a piece that I'm writing, and it's not done, and it's I'm in the middle of the piece, as much about the piece as I do. I don't know what's going to happen next, and I like that. I plan out so many things in my life, but I also like not knowing what's going to happen next and seeing where the music in the world takes me. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I agree. So how can people get in touch with you? Best way,
if they want to get in touch with me directly, they can look me up on Facebook. I don't mind at all when people message me on Facebook. They can go to our Bandworks Publications page on Facebook. They can also email me directly at patrickburnsmusic@gmail.com or at bandworkspublications@gmail.com. It gets to the same place. I used to have my own website, but I don't have that anymore. So everything I do is through either Facebook or the Bandworks website. Bandworkspublications.com is our website, and this summer we're redoing the entire website. We have a great website designer, Jason Gaines, who's redoing it. So that'll be out in July sometime.
Pat, you now have the honor of being my longest interview.
I can't stop talking.
That's okay. It was tremendous. I really enjoyed the conversation. We share a lot of the same views, and I'm finding as I do these interviews how similar people are.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a nice thing that when you're there, we all get discouraged, I think, to some degree, But it's nice to know that there are those people out there. They really are. They're out there just like us, just like we are, being discouraged, but also saying, there's a better way. And that's encouraging. And so I particularly appreciate your including me in this. And it was great fun.
Well, I'm happy that you came on. Thanks so much.
Thank you.